Imagine being a black man and befriending members of the Ku Klux Klan. The following podcast is going to be a very special presentation of Cylinder Radio. I started this podcast to try and have conversations to understand issues better. Daryl Davis is a world-renowned piano player and musician, and throughout his life, he had questions about racism. As a black man who has a lot of different life experiences, he didn't understand racism. He didn't understand why people would hate him who didn't even know him. So what he did was he had genuine curiosity and he went to the source. And he'll go over the story in the podcast, but I didn't even get to the whole story with him. He essentially found members of the KKK, the CEOs of racism, and he sat down with them, he let them talk, he asked them questions, and was sincerely interested in what they had to say. And over time, he actually befriended them. He went to KKK rallies where they were burning crosses, and he was the only black man there. And he became friends with members of the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi groups. And through that friendship, they gave up the life. They gave up the hateful ideology. He has a trophy room of dozens of robes of grand dragons and imperial wizards of the KKK. He didn't beat them up. He didn't fight them. He defeated them by befriending them. This is something we all can learn so much from, and I am so excited to introduce you to Daryl Davis. Sam Harris has a quote that I think applies to Daryl Davis. We have a choice. We have two options as human beings. We have a choice between conversation and war. That's it. Conversation and violence. Daryl Davis shows that conversation is the way. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, high school teacher in Los Angeles. And today I have on a gentleman who I think embodies why I started my podcast to begin with, the idea of different perspectives and having civil discourse and things like that. My guest today is Daryl Davis. He is an accomplished musician and author, and I am really excited to have him here because I think that we need some leadership. I am seeing a lack of leadership right now about how do we navigate these very tricky waters. And I think that Mr. Davis is someone who has walked a lot of roads in his life and someone that we can use as an example of how to get through this really difficult time. So, Daryl, thank you for being here, first of all. Can you introduce yourself to my audience, which I just said off the air? The reason why I reached out to you and kind of begged you to come on here is because I was appalled at how many educators had not heard your story and how many people had not heard your story. And I think that is a problem, especially people who are fighting against racism. The fact that they don't know your story, I think, highlights a lot of problems going on right now with the anti-racist kind of approach. So please introduce yourself to the audience and tell me a little bit about who you are and why you might be able to offer some enlightened ideas.
Sure. First of all, Will, thank you very, very much for having me. And thank you for all that you do, especially being a teacher and educating young people. You know, that is very impactful. Both my mom and dad, well, my mother was a professional teacher and my dad did some instruction at different places, but he was a U.S. Secret Service agent, one of the first Black Secret Service agents in the country, and a Foreign Service officer. So in later years, he would instruct. But so I have a great regard for education and for teachers. So thank you for all you do. Well, I'm 62 years old, born in Chicago. I've traveled all over the world. As I just pointed out, my dad was a U.S. Foreign Service, so I was an American Embassy brat. And starting in 1961, at the age of 3, I went overseas. So, you go to a country for 2 years, then you come back home, you're here for a few months, maybe a year, and then you get reassigned to another country overseas. So I lived in Africa, I lived in Europe, and between traveling with my parents as a child in the Foreign Service, combined now with my travels as a professional musician performing all over the world, I have been in a total of 57 different countries on 6 continents. So I've literally been exposed to a multitude of ethnicities, religions, cultures, socioeconomic statuses, you name it. I've seen it. And all of that has helped shape who I've become. And I had the great fortune of having a lot of that exposure as a young child. One of my very favorite quotes of all time is by Mark Twain, and it's called the Travel Quote. And Mark Twain said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." And that is so, so true.
That is
perhaps,
awesome.
Had I grown up here with my own, in my own country, that whole time and never had that exposure, would I be doing this work today? I'd like to think so, but probably not.
Yeah.
Well, my experience overseas, when I was in elementary school over there and middle school, depending upon what years I was there, and kindergarten for that matter, my classes were filled with kids from all over the world. Anybody who had an embassy, all of their kids were in the same school. So if you were to open the door to my classroom and stick your head in, you would say, my goodness, this looks like United Nations of little kids, because that's exactly what it was. But when I would return home here to my own country 2 years later and go to school, I would be in either all Black schools or Black and white schools, meaning the still segregated school or the newly integrated school. And although I was born in 1958 and desegregation happened in 1954 with the Supreme Court, Brown versus the Board of Education, schools did not desegregate overnight like that.
Right.
Years,
Yeah.
And so oftentimes I was in an all Black school or the newly integrated one, just Black kids and white kids. We did not have the amount of diversity in the classroom that we have today, say in places like LA or Washington, D.C. or whatever, or that I had overseas, back in the 60s. Because in the 60s here, just Black kids and white kids, you saw very few Hispanic kids or Asian kids in the classroom here. So I was already prepared for diversity. Unfortunately, many of my peers were not. So let's skip ahead now. I came back here in 1968, one of the times. I was in 4th grade, age 10. And we were in Belmont, Massachusetts at that time. Just got there. I was one of 2 Black kids in the entire school. Myself in 4th grade, and there was a little Black girl in 2nd grade. So the only time I really ever saw her was like at recess and at lunchtime.
Yeah.
So all of my friends, consequently, of course, were white. And many of my guy friends, 4th graders, they were members of the Cub Scouts, and they invited me to join. So I joined the Cub Scouts. I was the only Black Scout in the area back then in 1968. And Belmont is like right next door to Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. Okay. So there was this big parade from Lexington to Concord to commemorate the ride of Paul Revere, right? And the streets were blocked off, and both sides of the sidewalks, were lined. Both sides of the streets were lined with white people on the sidewalks, waving and cheering and yelling the British are coming and all that kind of thing. The Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, Brownies, 4-H Club, whatever. This big parade. I was the only Black person you could see. And everything was going along fine. And then at some point in parade, I began getting hit with bottles, soda pop cans, rocks, pebbles.
How old were you? You were in elementary school still?
Yeah, I was 10. I was in 4th grade.
Jeez. Yeah.
And, I saw who was doing it. People over here to my right, which was a small group of people mixed in with the larger crowd. It might have been maybe 4 or 5 people. I remember there being some kids that looked to be like maybe a couple years older than me. So they might have been 12 or 13, and a couple of adults who may have been their parents. I don't know. But anyway, I'm getting hit. My first inclination, because I had no precedent for this, was that these people over here don't like the Scouts. I didn't know why. Maybe they're jealous. Their kid didn't make the cut. Whatever.
Right.
And
Scout
I did not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did not realize that I was the only Scout getting hit until my Cub master, my troop leader, my den mother all came rushing back. They're all white, right? Yeah. And they huddled over me and escorted me out of the danger. Mm-hmm. And I kept saying, why are they hitting me? Why are they hitting me? I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything to them. I'm blaming myself, for my own victimization, because I thought I had done something that I shouldn't be doing. And I'm the only one getting this protection. So what had I done wrong? And, it's like a child, blaming themselves because their parents are getting divorced because they don't understand the dynamic. You understand?
Yeah.
So that's what it was with me. And they kept saying, shh, move along, Daryl, hurry, move along, it'll be okay. And they never answered my question as to why this was happening. I guess, they didn't know how to explain it to me or whatever.
Because it hadn't even occurred to you. Because you were just around people look different, like it. Yeah,
I was part of the Scouts. I wasn't thinking black and white, anything like that. I never had that problem. When I was overseas with every nationality in the world, while we all didn't necessarily speak always the same language, some kids knew English, others didn't. We all got along. We worked together, we played together, we had slumber parties together. There was no issue. So I had no reason to think any color, discrimination. Right. I just so after I thought about it, I was thinking, maybe it's because I'm the new kid on the block. They're just testing me out, picking on me. I had every excuse but the right excuse.
Yeah, but you're almost too logical. That's the thing is it's logical to think people are angry with me. I must have done something.
Right.
Yeah, it's a logical way to go. Yeah.
Exactly. And I've come to learn that racism is not logical. It's totally illogical. So if you want to understand it, you must understand irrationality. And at the time, I didn't understand that because I knew nothing about racism. So when I got home that day, I was bruised up, cut up a little bit, and my parents were like, they were not at the parade. They're like, what happened to you? How'd you fall down and get all scraped up? I told them I did not fall down. I told them precisely what had happened. And Will, for the first time in my life, my mom and dad sat me down and explained to me what racism was.
The talk.
The talk. At 10 years old. Believe it or not, I had never heard the word racism at the age of 10. I'd never heard that word. I had no clue what they were talking about. And what they were talking about made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. My 10-year-old brain could not get around the idea that someone who didn't know me, hadn't spoken to me, had never seen me before, would want to hurt the color of my skin. It just made no sense because the people who were doing this to me looked just like my friends at my elementary school in Belmont, or my little French friends or German friends or Swedish friends, for that matter, my fellow Americans at the embassy. So it couldn't be because of the color of my skin. White people don't have a problem with that. I had a lot of white friends and friends from all different colors and whatever. So my parents, who I loved and adored and trusted, because I'm an only child. So if I had a problem or a question, I went to my parents. And my parents had never lied to me before. If I had a question, they'd answer the question or give me the tools by which I could figure out the answer. If I had a problem, they solved it for me or gave me the tools to solve it for myself. When they told me this, I could not process it. And I literally thought for the first time in my life that my parents were lying to me. I did not believe them. I didn't know why they were lying, but they were lying. Some kind of joke is going on. They're pulling my leg on something. And I didn't know why. Well, about a month and a half, maybe 2 months later, that same year, 1968, on April the 4th, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And every major town, city in this country, nearby Boston, right here where I am now, Washington, D.C., my hometown, Chicago, Illinois, Los Angeles, New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Detroit, Nashville, all burned to the ground with rioting, destruction, violence, all in the name of this new word that I had learned, racism. So now I saw it with my own eyes. And so now I believe, oh, my parents didn't lie to me. They told me about this. There are people who are actually this way, this racist thing. So now I knew that it existed, but I did not know why it existed. So I formed a question in my mind, which was, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And now for the next 52 years, I've been looking for the answer to that question. So, that fall, we went back overseas. And once again, I was around what I call normalcy. Today we call that multicultural. But the term multicultural did not even exist back then. I remember when we first started using the term multicultural. It's only been 25, 30 years ago. And then it was multi-cultural. It's all one word. And it's in the dictionary. But back then, overseas, it was the norm to me. It was not the norm over here. And there was no describe it. So I went back overseas to what I called normalcy. And but every time I'd come home, I would experience some type of racism. And I began, as a teenager, buying every book I could find on Black supremacy, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, the Ku Klux Klan, the Nazis in Germany, the neo-Nazis over here, just to learn. I knew you were not born with that ideology. So where did you get it? Where is it going? How can it be addressed? I still have a vast library on this stuff. And I've read all these books. My books all talked about it, but they didn't answer the question as to why. And so I didn't get the answer to my question. How can you hate me? We don't even know. So I graduated high school in '76. I went right to Howard University in DC and majored in music, got my degree, graduated from there in 1980. And I've been a professional musician, on. So while music is my profession, studying race relations has become my obsession. And since, full time, since 1980. And a few years later, country music had made a resurgence. All the bars and nightclubs playing top 40, they switched over the format to country music. There had been a movie out called Urban Cowboy with John Travolta and this mechanical bull and all these country line dances. So it became very popular again. Just like, a few years back, swing dancing was a thing, in the 1940s. Yeah. So anyway, I want to work full time. I like country music. I like playing anything. So I joined this country band, and I was the only Black guy in the band. Consequently, usually the only Black guy wherever we played. But we played a bar, a club, a lounge up in Frederick, Maryland. The band had played there before. It's an all-white band. I'd never been there. I knew about it, though. The Silver Dollar Lounge at the time was a predominantly all-white lounge. Mm-hmm. Not that Black people could not go in there, but they were not welcome. And so they chose not to go in there. And that was pretty much a good choice. When you go somewhere where you're not wanted and alcohol is being served, it can make a pretty bad recipe. So here I am in the Silver Dollar Lounge. And my first time, we made a bandstand. I'm walking to go sit down with my bandmates. And I felt somebody from behind come up and put their arm around my shoulder. Now, I see the whole band up, in front of me walking towards the table. And I don't know anybody in this place. So, who's touching me? I turn around to look. And it's this white guy, maybe 15, 18 or so years older than me. And he's very jovial, very friendly. And he says, "Man, I sure like your all's music." I said, "Thank you, I appreciate that." And I shook his hand. And he points at the stage. He says, "I've seen this here band before, but I ain't never seen you before. Where'd you come from?" And I explained to the guy, yeah, you probably did see them. They told me they played here, but this is my first time. And he says, man, I sure like your piano playing. This is the first time I ever heard a black man play piano like Jerry Lee Lewis. And I was not offended, but I was kind of surprised that this guy who's older than me, who had probably grown up with more of Jerry Lee's music
Little
than
Richard?
I had.
I mean, come on.
Well, yeah, exactly. I'm thinking Little Richard, Fats Domino, you know.
Come on.
And I'm thinking, you know, this guy is older than me. He was probably, he grew up, you know, with more of this music than I did, because I was born in '58. You know, as the birth of rock and roll was, you know, the pioneers were declining their heyday, and people, you know, were coming in, other people coming in. So anyway, I said, well, where do you think Jerry Lee Lewis learned how to play? And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, well, Jerry Lee learned from the same place I did, from black, blues, and boogie-woogie piano players. That's where rock and roll and rockabilly came from. And I don't recall what song I was playing, you know, when he made that association to Jerry Lee, but I know the style, of course. And he said, oh, no, Jerry Lee invented that. I ain't never seen no black man play piano like that, except for you. And so I assured him, I said, listen, man, I know Jerry Lee Lewis. He's a very good friend of mine. He's told me himself the people he used to go see as a kid and things like that. The guy did not believe I knew Jerry Lee, and he didn't believe that Jerry Lee learned anything from black people. But he considered me a novelty and was so fascinated that he wanted me to come back to his table, and he was going to buy me a drink. Now, I don't drink, but I agreed to go back there, and I had a cranberry juice. So he bought my cranberry juice for me. He takes his glass, right, and he clinks my glass and cheers me and says, you know, this is the first time I ever sat down and had a drink with a black man. And, you know, I'm like, you know, where is this guy coming from, and where has he been? You know, in what planet? You know, has he just landed from where apparently there were no black people on that planet, but there sure as hell are a lot on this planet? How did he miss them all as old as he is? Because, you know, I had sat down at that point in my life with literally thousands of white people or anybody else and had a meal, a conversation, a beverage, whatever. So I asked him innocently, I said, why? You know, and he didn't answer me. He looked down at the tabletop. I asked him again, and his buddy elbowed him, who was sitting next to him, said, tell him. I said, tell me. Because, you know, now I'm really curious. What is this mystery?
Yeah.
And he looked back at me just as plain as day, and he said, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I just burst out laughing. I'm not kidding you. I just burst out laughing because I didn't believe him. I know a lot about the Klan. I just told you I have a whole library of books on the Klan. And none of my books ever talked about how a Klansman will come up and hug a black guy and want to buy him a drink and hang out. It doesn't work that way. So, you know, this guy's, you know, jerking me around. He's making a joke, so I'm going to laugh. I'm laughing. He goes inside his pocket, pulls out his wallet, and hands me his Klan card, his membership card. Ooh. I recognize the Ku Klux Klan insignia, which is a red circle with a white cross and a red blood drop in the center of the cross.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh my God, you know, this thing is for real. And now I'm like wondering, why am I sitting at this table with this Klansman? But he's very friendly. Yeah. You know, we're talking, he's friendly, he's buying me a drink and, you know, talking about music and whatever else. And, you know, we talked about the Klan and other things, but he gave me his phone number. And he wanted me to call him whenever I was to return to the Silver Dollar Lounge with this band, because he wanted to bring his friends, meaning Klansmen and Klanswomen, to see the black guy play piano like Jerry Lee. I'm not sure he called me a black guy to his friends, but nonetheless, that's what he wanted to do. Yeah. So I said, okay. So I you know, every 6 weeks we were, you know, rebooked there on a rotation with other bands for the weekend. So I called the guy like on a Wednesday or Thursday and say, hey man, you know, we're gonna be up at Silver Dollar, come on up. He'd come both nights, Friday and Saturday. He'd bring Klansmen and Klanswomen. You know, they came in regular clothing, not, you know, robes and hoods. But they would gather around near the stage and watch me play on my side of the stage where the piano was. And then they'd get out on the dance floor and dance, carry on. You know, on the break, you know, I'd mingle around. I'd always go to his table to say hello to him. And some of them would hang there because they were curious about me. You know, they wanted to meet me, talk to me, whatever. others would see me coming in that direction. They'd get up and scoot away, go to some other part of the room, just to look at me from afar. They didn't want, it's like, look but do not touch kind of thing. Yeah. That's cool, whatever. So I'd meet some other people, other Klan people, men and women. And that went on until the end of that year, at which time I quit the band and went back to playing rock and roll and blues and R&B and whatever else was going on. And so I had forgotten about the guy because I had no reason to think of him. It wasn't like, I had a day off, so I'd run up to his neighborhood and hang out with the Klan. It wasn't like that. It would just be like, I'd call him and hang out with him when I was working in that particular place. So I'd forgotten about him. And then it dawned on me, Daryl, the answer to your question that has been plaguing you since the age of 10 fell right into your lap. Yeah. Who better to ask, how can you hate me when you don't even know me, than to ask someone who would go so far as to join an organization that has over 100-year history of practicing hating people who don't look like them and who don't believe as they believe. Reconnect with that guy.
It's so obvious. It's right in it's the most obvious thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But because it happened so, out of the blue, it didn't occur to me at that point. So I looked at it as a serendipity, I guess. Yeah. It fell into my lap and I didn't recognize it. And so I made plans to, try to, call him or whatever else. And then my mom passed away. So I had to deal with that, and then I put it aside for a while. And then I said, okay, now's my time. I'm going to do this. I'm going to call that guy, get him to hook me up with the Grand Dragon. Grand Dragon means state leader of Maryland, where I live now, and get him to hook me up with that guy. I'm going to interview him, and then I'm going to go up north, go down south, go to the Midwest, go to the West, and interview various Klan leaders and write a book about it. Because there had been no book written about the Klan by a Black author who sat down, talked, and interviewed them. There had been books written by Black authors, 2 books, where each author detailed how he escaped a lynching, one in the 1930s, one in the 1940s, but not from the perspective of sitting down, interviewing their would-be lynchers.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to ask anyway. Can I ask you a question? Jump right into it. One of the things that I try to promote on here, and I've had, I think this is like maybe my 63rd podcast, and it's the most diverse group of people you could ever imagine. Uh-huh. And I am just really curious. Were you genuine? It sounds like, maybe I'm wrong, but were you genuinely curious for the answer, or were you looking for somehow to highlight him to be evil, highlight him to be wrong, just like looking for or were you it seems like you were actually asking the question, how, sincerely, how can you hate me if you don't know me? And you were interested in what his response was, not whatever his response is going to be an idiot, because he's clearly an idiot. He's in the KKK. So whatever he says doesn't really have value other than just to ridicule him. But
no, the
see where I'm getting at?
Yeah, I see exactly. Yeah. And had I not had the experience of dealing with regular white people who accepted me and liked me genuinely as their friend or whatever, playmate, if I had the opportunity, if I'd not had that experience and knew that this person was separate from those people, and he was my first experience, I might have a whole different attitude towards white people. And if I had the opportunity to meet a Klansman with that mentality, that frame of mind, then I'd probably be looking to ridicule him. Right. I know I'm smarter than him, so I'm just going to go in there and just debate him and just put him in his place.
Yeah.
Okay. But no,
you didn't, though, right?
Pardon me?
It's good that you didn't.
It's good that I didn't. Yes, but to answer your question. It was more curiosity on my part, genuine curiosity. Yeah. And I'll give you an analogy if I can digress for a second. Please. A lot of, I don't mean this to paint a broad brush across the field, because that's not the case. But a lot of people who go into psychology because they had screwed up childhoods. And they want to find out, why did this happen to me? Why were my parents like this? Why was I raised that way? And then when they figure it out, then they figure they can help everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a reason that many of them do that.
I've seen that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in that sense, and they genuinely want to know what is in those people's mindsets that they abuse their kid, or either emotionally, sexually, physically, whatever. They genuinely want to know. Well, I had been abused by having rocks and stuff thrown at me. I genuinely want to know. All you see is this. What is it about this that you want to attack me? So it was a genuine question. So anyway, I went to find his number. I found his number, and I called it, and the phone had been disconnected. It'd been a long time since I've seen him. Mm-hmm. And so it took me a while to try to track him down. And turns out he had moved and he didn't have a phone, but I was able to get an address on him. And there was no way for me to let him know that I wanted to get a hold of him. So I went to his house, rather his apartment, unannounced. And one evening I knock on the apartment door, and he opens the door. He's like, Daryl, what are you doing here, right? He steps out into the hallway and looks up and down the hallway as though I brought somebody with me or something. And so when he stepped out of his apartment, I stepped in. And so he turns around, he comes back in. He goes, man, how's it going, man? What are you doing? You still playing? What's going on? I said, yeah, I'm still playing. But listen, I need to talk to you about the Klan. He says, the Klan? I said, yeah, you're still a member, right? Well, he told me he had quit the Klan. And I said, well, where's all your Klan stuff? He says, what do you mean, my robe and hood? I said, yeah. He goes, well, they came and got it. I said, what do you mean they came and got it? Don't you own your robe and hood? And he explained this to me, which I later found out to be true, that when you join, you can pay for all the stuff, your robe and hood, your Klan handbook, and this, that, and the other. You can pay for it all up front if you have the money, and it's yours to keep forever. If you don't have the money at the time, you can still take all the stuff home with you, but you put extra money in every time you pay your dues until it's paid off. It's like it's on layaway, but you can take it home, So anyway, he told me that he all he had left was the mask that covers the face, that attaches to the hood. But when they came to get it, he couldn't find the mask, and he has since found it. He needed to return it. So I said, let me see it. And he went down this hallway behind us to some room, I guess his bedroom, and he returned with this mask and handed it to me. And I'm looking at this thing, and what happened was, they came and they repoed his robe and hood because he hadn't paid it off. So anyway, I'm looking at this mask in my hand, and I said to him, do you know Roger Kelly? And he got all excited. Yeah, I know Roger. Roger was my Grand Dragon. And I said, listen, I'm writing a book on the Klan, and I want you to connect me with Roger Kelly. I want to interview him for my book. He goes, Daryl, I can't do that, man. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, oh, man, I can't take no black man to do the Grand Dragon. And I said, but you're not in the Klan anymore. It doesn't matter. We both will be in trouble. So I begged and pleaded with him. He said, no, he couldn't do it. I said, look here, you got to return this mask, right? And he said, yeah. I said, give me Roger Kelly's phone number and address, and I'll go to his house and return it for you. That man snatched that mask right out of my hand, boom, like that. And he says, no way. He was not going to be involved in giving some black man this part of his Klan robe and sending me over to Roger Kelly's house. So I begged and pleaded some more to get Roger's information. He finally gave it to me on the condition that I not tell Mr. Kelly where I got his personal information. I said, okay, fine. So then he warned me, he said, Daryl, do not go to Roger Kelly's house. He will kill you. He was genuinely concerned about my safety. And so I said, I need to talk to him. And he said, listen, he told me about a place where the Klan hangs out on a certain night. And he said, you go there. It's a public place. He says, I don't guarantee you that Roger Kelly will even talk to you, but you're safer to approach him in a public, place than go on his property. I said, okay. So I did go to that place. He was not there that night. He does hang out there, but he was not there that night. And so I didn't get him. And I gave my secretary who worked out of my house, I gave her my Roger Kelly's phone number, and she's white. And I only mentioned that because it's part of my story. Like I could care less what color my secretary is.
No,
but yeah. So I'm thinking, okay, this guy hates black people. Well, obviously he's in the Klan, and this other guy tells me, he'd kill me if I went over there. So I don't want to blow my project. I need to talk to Roger Kelly, and I want to sit down and talk with him. So I figured if I called the guy, he might recognize in my voice that I'm black. So I'm not talking to you. Click, and my whole project would have ended before it ever got started. So I gave Mary my Roger Kelly's phone number, and she's white, like I told you. I said, call this guy, and wait until after 5 when people get off work, and tell him that you are working for a man who is writing a book on the Klan. Would he consent to sitting down and talking with your boss, and being interviewed? I said, however, do not tell Mr. Kelly that I'm black. If he asks, don't lie to him, but don't allude to it. Don't give him reason to ask. And that was for 2 reasons. One, again, if he knew I was black, he might hang up or decline the interview. And secondly, if he knew I was black and accepted the interview, he would, in the interim, he might prepare different answers that he would give a black person than he would give a white person asking the same questions. And the reason why I wanted Mary to call was I knew that he would tell by her voice, this is a white person, that he would just automatically know. Mm-hmm. And I knew the mentality well enough to know that he would not think that this white woman on the other end of the phone line was working for a black man, especially a black man who's writing a book on the Klan, right, because they didn't exist. So, my identity would be secret until he saw me. And so she called him, and he agreed to do the interview. And skipping ahead, we set up a time and date, and it was for a Sunday afternoon at 5:15 in the evening. I remember that. And we got this room in this motel. In fact, the motel right above the Silver Dollar Lounge. Yeah. And the way the room just happened to be, if you're standing in the hallway at the door looking in, you cannot see who's in the room. You have to come in and turn around the corner, and the room is back there. So, you got to be halfway into the room before you even know who's in there. Yeah. And so I took the lamp table and took the lamp off and put the table over in the far corner of the room where you had to come deep into the room. And I put a chair on one side for Mr. Kelly, a chair on the other side for me. And I gave Mary some money and sent her down the hallway to get some soda pop and put it in the ice bucket, put some ice in there, get it all cold. I wanted to be hospitable. I had no idea what this man was going to do when he came and he saw me. Would he get angry and say, I'm not talking to you, and turn around and walk away? Or would he attack me? Or would he come in the room and do the interview like he told Mary he would do? But in any event, I wanted to be hospitable and offer him a cold beverage. So she got all that said. And, we'd gotten there like several hours earlier because, when the Klan people, they bring their Grand Dragon or Imperial Wizard to some, public place or whatever, they always send scouts out in advance to check and see who's there before they bring this person. Just like, if the president's going to be somewhere, the Secret Service is there days in advance, So I got there hours in advance. So, if any of the scouts were out, they wouldn't know it's this black guy who's, trying to see the Grand Dragon. So anyway, I was sitting at the table, Mary was sitting there with me, and right on time, man, right to the minute, knock, knock, knock on the door at 5:15. Mary hops up and runs around the corner to open the door. I'm still sitting at the table, and in walks the Grand Nighthawk, which is the bodyguard for the Grand Dragon. And he's wearing military fatigues, camouflage, and he's got that Klan patch over here on his chest, that red circle, white cross, blood drop. Over here are the initials KKK. Embroidered on his cap, it said Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And he has a semi-automatic handgun and a holster on his hip. He comes in, and Roger Kelly, the Grand Dragon, is walking right behind him. He's wearing a dark blue suit and tie. I mean, he's like right behind him. But the bodyguard turned the corner and saw me and just, froze in place. And Mr. Kelly did not realize that, because Mr. Kelly had not seen me yet, because he can't see around the guy. He did not realize that his bodyguard had stopped short. And so he slammed into his back and knocked him forward. So now they both are like stumbling around, regaining their balance. And I'm just sitting there, watching this comedy, so to speak. And I could read their faces. I mean, it was like a highway billboard sign. Yeah. I could tell exactly what they were thinking. They were thinking, did the desk clerk give us the wrong room number? Or did we misunderstand what he said? Or it's just an ambush? That was going through their minds. And I realized all that apprehension. So I stood up and I displayed my hands, my palms of my hands, to show I had nothing in them. And I walked forward and I extended my right hand and I said, "Hi, Mr. Kelly." I said, "I'm Daryl Davis." And he shook my hand. And the bodyguard, the Nighthawk, shook my hand. So far, so good. Everything was going as planned. And I escorted them into the room. "Come on, please have a seat."
Was there apprehension even? Like, I don't know what a KKK guy would think, but like, is there even apprehension of like touching? Is it like a weird thing like that? Like,
sometimes it is for some of them. Some of them, yeah. Like the ones who got up and scooted away from the table when I came over there in the bar. Yeah, Klansmen and Klanswomen are not stamped out of a standard cookie cutter. They come from all different walks of life, different, attitudes, etc. So
I mean, I'm gonna have a bunch of questions, but please continue the story, because people don't. I've heard the stories and I think they're unbelievable, but I think people probably haven't. So please continue with the story, and then I do have some questions for you though. You froze for about 10 seconds. All I heard was, "I'm gonna have a bunch of questions," and you froze. Oh, I just said, these stories I heard when you were talking on Rogan, but I think a lot of my audience probably hasn't. So I appreciate you kind of walking us through this, but I do have some questions, because I'm seeing patterns now, and I think patterns are so important to try and move us forward, because we have such an opportunity in 2020. And I don't know what your time frame is like, but like I wanna get the story, but then I'm seeing these patterns. I think that we have a real opportunity in front of us with what's going on right now to move forward with something better. So I'm seeing these patterns. So I wanna come back to like stuff that you said and ask some questions about that, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely, and I have plenty of time for you.
Okay.
So he sat down. And the bodyguard stood to his right at attention. And before I could sit down, he says, "Mr. Davis, do you have any form of identification?" I said, "Sure." And I handed him my driver's license. And he looked at it, he goes, "Oh, you live on such and such street." Now, that kind of unnerved me a little bit. Like, why is he looking at my address? Is he going to come to my house and burn a cross? All he needs to do is look at my face and look at the picture on my license, look at my name, match it up, and give it back to me. He doesn't need my address. So, I was unnerved a little bit, but I didn't want to let him know that. So I said, "Yes, Mr. Kelly, that is my address." I said, "And you live at," and I named his house number and his street. And I was, implying that if you came and visited me, I'm going to come visit you. So let's just, confine all our visiting to this motel room.
Jeez.
So he smiled, he nodded his head like he understood what I was implying. I did not realize that day, it was many months down the road, that it was pure coincidence that he was talking about my street name. I had been presumptuous. Right. One of his Klan members lived down the road from me in a couple of neighborhoods down. And my street runs over to that neighborhood. And so Mr. Kelly would have to travel down my street in order to get to that member's house. So he simply recognized the street name. Pure coincidence. Right. I had no way of knowing that day. Anyway, we got on with the interview, and I had a bag sitting beside my chair, a black canvas bag, in which I had a copy of the Bible, because the Klan claims to be a Christian organization. They say that the Bible preaches racial separation. I've never seen that in the Bible. So I wanted to be able to, pull it out and hand it to Mr. Kelly and say, show me where. And I had a cassette recorder, which I set in the middle of the table, all hoping he would let me record the interview, which he did. And I had some blank cassettes in the bag. So, we were talking, and within the first few minutes, he told me that that black people, reason why he doesn't like them, that's, my question, how can you hate me when you don't know me, is because black people are criminals. We're prone to crime. And the reason, the proof of it is, look at the prisons. There are more blacks in prison than there are white people.
Yeah.
So, one's perspective is one's reality. That's what he sees, and it fits his narrative. Mm-hmm. He doesn't consider the inequity of the judicial system, or the fact that many of these black people cannot afford a Johnny Cochran or somebody, So there they are in prison, innocent or guilty. He doesn't look at that. He looks at the result. And then he tells me that, black people are lazy. We don't want to work. We prefer to scam the government welfare system. But if you check the stats, there are more whites on welfare than black people. There are more whites in this country. And then he told me that black people, we are born with a smaller brain size than white people. And so he is equating brain size to IQ capacity. The larger the brain, the higher the IQ. So, I'm just sitting there listening to him go through all these reasons to justify why he doesn't like people like me. And
you're just quite like, it's nonsense upon nonsense upon nonsense, but yes. You know that, see it, but you know that you can't jump all over it because he'll immediately shut down.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Hello?
But I didn't even feel like I had to jump all over him, even if he wouldn't shut down, because what he was saying was truly offensive.
Yeah.
However, I was not offended. And I was not offended because he was telling a lie. Why would I be offended by a lie? That man does not know me. He only met me 5 or 10 minutes ago. All he sees is the color of my skin, and he's going to make these claims about me. If I were to be offended by that, I would be empowering his claims. I know who I am. How can this man who just walked in my motel room, 10 minutes ago, for the first time seeing me, define who I am? Now, if my parents had told that about me, I might have some concerns because they know me, or my high school classmates or whatever. They have a little bit more knowledge of me than some guy who just walked into my room and saw my skin color and then makes these assertions. So I'm not going to let somebody who doesn't know me define me. So I wasn't offended at all. I recognized what he was saying was offensive. I also recognized that it was complete nonsense. So I let him get it out. And when he finished, I said, well, Mr. Kelly, I got to tell you something. I said, number one, I don't have a criminal record. I have never been on welfare. I've never measured my brain size, but I'm sure it's the same size as yours or anybody else's. And then he kind of changed the subject. So, they are so used to combating with people that they don't like.
Yeah.
Either verbally or physically or whatever.
Yeah.
And I threw him off his game because he was saying all this stuff, and I'm just sitting there listening to him and taking it all in and letting him get it out. Because a lot of people will try to shut that kind of thing down, right? So
he's probably always on guard of just like, I got to fight day in and day out, fighting
exactly
to defend these ideas.
That's what he's programmed for.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so I threw him off his game by not escalating the situation like he's accustomed to. And so because I let him get it out, he reciprocated and allowed me to make my points, So we had a conversation. We found some things that we agreed upon with each other. We found some things that we did not agree upon. And every time he would say, Mr. Davis, the Bible says, I'd reach down, get the Bible. Please, Mr. Kelly, show me chapter and verse. Or my cassette, ran out of tape. I'd reach down and get a fresh cassette. And every time I reached down, the Nighthawk would reach up to his gun, put his hand on the butt of the gun. And after a while, he realized I had no problem with that because that's his job. He has no idea what's in my bag, and he's there to protect his boss. So he's doing his job. I understood that. But after a while, he realized there was no threat in the bag, and he relaxed. He wasn't even standing erect anymore. And every time I went in the bag, he didn't move. He didn't reach for the gun, nothing. And so, we're going along pretty good, agreeing, disagreeing, etc. And just like you and I are talking right now, all of a sudden, maybe an hour and some minutes later, there was a fast, quick noise in the room. That was it, just. And we all jumped. Everybody in the room jumped. My secretary, me, Mr. Kelly, and the Nighthawk. And the noise happened so fast and was so short, out of nowhere, that my ear could not discern what it was. And all in a split second, I had jumped out of my chair and slammed my hands on the table because I was getting ready to dive across the table and attack them. I'd gone into that frame of mind. And at the same time, I'm thinking, what did I just say? What did I just do to cause Mr. Kelly to make that noise? Because I knew that he had made the noise. I was convinced beyond any shadow of a doubt because I knew I didn't make the noise. So if I didn't make it, he had to have made it. And the voice of that other Klansman, the former Klansman, Daryl, don't fool with Roger Kelly, he'll kill you. That's rolling around in my head too. And after all, I am in a hostile environment. I'm sitting in a room with the head of the Ku Klux Klan, and he has an armed bodyguard with him. I'm not armed. My secretary is not armed. So I feared for my life in that moment. And when you fear for your life, you go into survival mode. And people do different things, how they process fear and what they do to survive. Some people, they just pass out, they faint because the fear is so great, their brain cannot process it and it shuts off and they pass out. I don't do that. Another thing people will do, their body will constrict. Their muscles will tighten up and they'll curl into a little ball and they can't move. That's paralysis by fear. I don't do that either. The next thing people will do is that, they'll run away. I will do that. We all should do that. Separate yourself from the fear as quickly as possible. Put as much distance between yourself and whatever you think is going to take your life as quickly as you can. But that's exactly what I would have done, but it was not an option for me because you cannot outrun a bullet in a motel room. And so the next alternative is to do a preemptive strike. Get them before they get you. And when I came up out of my chair, I was going to dive across that table, grab the Nighthawk, grab Mr. Kelly, slam them down to the ground, and take away the Nighthawk's gun. Because I did not want to die that day. And my job is to protect myself and my secretary. Nighthawk's job is to protect himself and his boss. I did not know if Mr. Kelly had a weapon up under his suit jacket or not. All I knew was I saw one on that man's hip. And, so he's going down, and I'm going to assume Mr. Kelly might have had one, so he's going down too, right? And when I came up and hit the table, I'm looking right into Mr. Kelly's eyes because he's the one that I think made the noise. And neither one of us said a word, but we both could tell what the other one was thinking. I'm looking at him, and I knew my eyes were telling him, what did you just do? And his eyes had fixated on mine, and I could read his eyes. And his eyes were saying to me, what did you just do? And the Nighthawk was like looking back and forth between both of us, like, what did either one of y'all just do? He has his hand on the butt of his gun. So Mary, she was sitting on top of the dresser that was to my left because there were no more chairs. And she realized what had happened, and she began explaining it when it happened again. The ice in the bucket had melted because it had been sitting there for a while. And as it melted, the cans shifted down the ice. That was it. And we all began laughing at how ignorant we all had been.
What a metaphor.
Yeah.
What
you
a
know?
metaphor. Like,
And
you thought it was you,
as
you thought it was him. This huge thing, and it just was, no, it was just ice melting because you guys were there for so long. But the tension was so high that just that little thing, and everyone was just about to erupt.
Exactly. And as a teacher, you can appreciate this. You know that a teaching moment and a learning moment sometimes don't happen at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, you teach your kids something in your class, they might get it a week later. The light bulb pops on, you know?
Maybe not 10 years later. Yeah.
Sometimes, exactly.
Yeah,
so this was a teaching moment. I won't say it was a learning moment, but it was a teaching moment. And the lesson taught was this for all of us. All because some foreign, and I emphasize the word foreign, underline it, highlight it, circle it, whatever, some foreign entity, that being the bucket of ice and Kansas soda, of which we were ignorant, entered into our little comfort zone via the noise that it made. We became fearful of each other, right? Because we didn't know what that sound was. We became fearful and accusatory of each other. Well, if you do not keep that fear in check, that fear will escalate to hatred, because we hate the things that frighten us.
Yeah.
If you do not keep the hatred in check, the hatred will escalate to destruction. We want to destroy the things that we hate. Why? Because they frighten us. But guess what? They may have been harmless and we were simply ignorant. So we saw the whole chain unravel to almost completion. Completion would have been had the Nighthawk drawn his gun and shot somebody, destroyed, right? Exactly. It stopped just short of that, or had I pounced across the table and hurt one of them. We did see that same chain that I'm talking about unravel to full completion 3 years ago on August 12th, 2017 in Charlottesville, Virginia, where at this white supremacist rally, there was a lot of ignorance there that day. There was a lot of fear there that day. There was a lot of hatred there that day. And what did it culminate in? It culminated in a white supremacist getting inside his vehicle and trying to run down as many protesters as he could, murder them. He succeeded in injuring 20 and murdering one young lady named Heather Heyer. And just the other day, I don't know if you saw it on the news or not, a Klansman in Richmond, Virginia, ran his car into the protesters, ran his pickup truck into the protesters. Okay, so that's the chain. Ignorance breeds fear, breeds hatred, breeds destruction. You know.
Well, I'm sorry, but if you would have jumped across the table and started attacking him, then in their head, they're like, "Oh, well, he's violent. He's a criminal." I mean, it would have just and they would have just become so much more emboldened with this horrible ideology. So
exactly,
and it would have been very reasonable because you are scared. This guy has a gun. You're the KKK. You're a musician. Right. It would be very reasonable for you to jump across, and it would be reasonable for him to kill you and then go out with this ideology.
Right.
Like, it was so close. How things would have been different if that would have happened.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know, you're out there in Los Angeles, and so you've probably been to Disneyland and stuff and seen the roller coasters. I don't know if you're into roller coasters or not, but you hear people say, "Oh man, I hate those things." Well, why? Well, they scare the daylights out of me, you know. So the fear breeds the hatred, right? And I'll give you another example that I've done, and you'll appreciate this as a teacher. I've spoken to elementary school kids and middle school kids. You know, of course, I tone it down for them, but I'll give you an example. I'll be talking to them about racism, this, that, the other, and then just out of the blue, I'll scream and point down at the floor under somebody's chair. I say, "Hey, there's a snake under your chair." And all the kids, even though I'm pointing to the front chair in the front row, all the kids 5 rows back scream and throw their legs up in the air, you know, because it could be them, you know, whatever. Yeah. And then they realize there's no snake under their chair, and they start laughing. And I'm like, you know, why did you all scream and act like that? And all you hear is, I hate snakes. I'm scared of snakes, blah, blah, blah. So I say, well, why are you afraid of snakes? Why do you hate snakes? Well, they're slimy and they're poisonous. Yeah. Well, there's your ignorance. Because if you ever touch a snake is not slimy, it's dry. And not all snakes are poisonous. Some are non-poisonous and good snakes. And there's your ignorance. So the ignorance breeds the fear. Yeah. And as you see, I'm afraid of snakes. I hate snakes. There's a hatred. So then I say to them, I say, okay, look, there is no snake under your chair, obviously. I'm just joking with you. But let's just say that there really was a snake under your chair. What would you want me to do about it? You know what they say? Kill it. Right. There's your destruction. So even go to little kids. Ignorance breeds fear, breeds hatred, breeds destruction.
It is so interesting they use that as an analogy. I just started releasing videos and stuff about everything going on my YouTube and my social media. And I was talking about the police. And I actually used the exact same metaphor, Daryl. I said, if you have no idea about snakes and you're out in the wild and you see a snake, you just assume it's poisonous. You assume it's dangerous. You either run away from it or smash it. Where if you are a snake expert, you go, oh, that's red and black bands around it. Oh, that's fine. That's a king snake. That's not scary at all. And you just pick it right up. Or it's a garter snake. But, oh, that's a copperhead. You got to watch out for that one because you know what you're talking about. But when people aren't trained, are in their bubbles, their silos and things like that, then they're really not. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing that you brought that up because that's the exact metaphor that I would just
and let me dovetail on your metaphor. Yeah. Okay, the person who says, that's a king snake. Oh, that's a copperhead. Okay, that person is not ignorant. All right, it's the people who are ignorant who fear because they don't know. Yeah. All right, and so. There's the difference. Now, you mentioned the police. Let's talk about them for a second.
Okay. And then I have a bunch of questions for you. But let's go to the police. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, go for it.
It's all right. So, there's a problem with the police.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yes.
And, when you have a problem with a police department or a corporation or something like that, or a restaurant, whatever. If the subordinates, the people on the ground level, are been engaging in wrongful behavior or whatever, it's usually because of poor management. Mm-hmm. Management sets the example; it trickles down, or they're not watching their employees down on the ground. Okay,
not well. So
you set the example at the top, and it trickles down, and people behave themselves on the ground floor. That's how you fix things. However, with racism, people try to do that, and that's the wrong approach. You don't try to fix things from the top of racism. The bottom is ignorance, fear, hatred, destruction. Well, now you cannot fix the destruction. Once you destroy somebody, they're gone. They're not coming back. Yeah. So the next level down, you want to address the hatred. Forget about the hatred. The hatred is not important. Next level down is the fear. Forget about the fear. Fear is not important, okay? When you have cancer in your bone, you don't put a topical cream on top, or a Band-Aid. You got to drill down to the bone and put that radiation or chemo or whatever it is in the source. Yeah. The source of all this is the racism. Is the ignorance, as you just pointed out. The guy who knows about snakes is not ignorant, therefore he doesn't fear them. He knows what to fear, what not to fear. Okay? It's the ignorance. If you cure the ignorance, then you know stuff. If the ignorance if there's no ignorance, there's no fear. If there's nothing to fear, there's nothing to hate. If there's nothing to hate, there's nothing to destroy. So we do have a cure for ignorance. That cure is called education, which is exactly what you do and what you provide.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah,
it's trickle up.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's what this little grassroots podcast is. And, even a real snake expert can even pick up a black mamba or something, the most dangerous snake. And they
know how to do it.
They can handle it because they know how to treat it. So there isn't a person out there that you can't treat and help if you're in law enforcement. But it takes a lot of effort. You to become a snake expert, you have to.
And as far as as people, I can understand. Perhaps most people might have a fear of snakes because of the media, what they see, what they hear. But when you reach a certain age, like, you're over the age of 18 or something, you've been in society for long enough to know that the person who has yellow skin or tan skin or black skin or whatever color skin is another human being. Most people don't encounter snakes every day in their life, but we encounter people every day in our lives. We see them on the street. We see them at work. We see them at play. We see them in our school.
But do we interact with them though, Daryl? That's
the problem.
Yes.
Okay. But we've been around long enough to know that they're harmless, that they're human beings. We go to the store, they wait on us. We go to the restaurant, they wait on us. They shine our shoes in the airport. They clean our houses. If we hire them, they work on the streets. So we know that these are human beings, and we are in more closer proximity to them on a regular basis than we are to snakes. And if we are in a metropolitan city like Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago, DC, whatever, Baltimore, you find people who work in a company upstairs in their offices, and they're working on a project. They might even share the same cubicle on the same project. They get along fine working together on this project. But what happens at 12 noon? They all go downstairs to the cafeteria in the basement, and the blacks sit with the blacks. The Hispanics sit with the Hispanics. They self-segregate. Now,
Democrats,
does that mean
Republicans?
Yeah. Does that mean that they're racist? Not necessarily. People tend to want to be around people who share the same beliefs or culture or language, or food or whatever. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're racist. But if they intentionally try to avoid other people in a social setting, then we got a problem.
Yeah. When you said, so I just want to go into a couple of questions. So, I mean, I could talk to you for 20 hours, but when you said that he hadn't known like a black piano players, that is shocking. But I have talked to several teachers who did not know that there are black conservatives.
Yeah.
It is, and they're like, no. If you're black, then you're a Democrat. And I was just like this. I just see similar things. Like when you talk about traveling, I love that Mark Twain quote. I actually didn't know that one. I love it. I'm going to be using that a lot.
Mark Twain travel quote. Look it up.
Yeah, it's like intellectual travel though. I have friends who they're activists right now out there, fighting the good fight, but they said, I talked to all of my black friends and they're in theater. And so all of their black friends are theater people. And black people in theater would be very different. That's like you said, all Klans people aren't stamped the same.
Yeah.
And obviously all black people aren't stamped the same. And to get black voices, what I am getting frustrated with is I am politically homeless. Like I have very progressive ideas. I have conservative ideas because like we're business owners and stuff. Like we're kind of I'm all over the place. But I'm seeing a real lack of diversity within diversity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I don't see, especially in education, because everyone, you get into education, you have the psychological temperament to want to help people and you're more probably progressive minded and stuff. But they have these glaring blind spots about what is the black experience because we're only getting one perspective on that. What are your thoughts on like that element of diversity within diversity? Because there's a lot of, let's just use this for example, like white liberals who will say, well, I have, these black friends, or I listen to these black, people, but they're all on one side of the political spectrum. So how aren't you missing a whole group that aren't getting represented? And that's a concern to me. I don't know if that's founded or not.
Yeah. That's very true. And because one's perception is one's reality. Okay, if you are not getting pulled over at nighttime and getting shot and getting hit in the head with a nightstick, then you naturally think when one of your black friends tells you that happened to him, you're gonna be like, well, what did you do? I didn't do anything, man. Yeah. Well, you had to have done something because police just don't do that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's one's perspective is one's reality. So you're right. We do have those differences between black people, just like anybody else, and they in the beginning, most black people were Republicans.
Yeah.
Okay. And most racist white people were Democrats. The Klan was formed by basically Democrats. All right. We became Republican. Why? Because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and he was our hero. He freed the slaves. So naturally, we gravitate toward his party. Then, there was a bit of a shift around 1964 or so with Barry Goldwater, who was a vehement racist. Kept trying to stop the Civil Rights Act and all that kind of stuff. And Republicans were joining in on that bandwagon. We're like, whoa, something's wrong here.
Yeah. So,
and then the Democrats were turning around. They're becoming more liberal and accepting us, et cetera. And so we went Democratic. But there are a lot of good conservative values. There are a lot of good Democratic values. And so, you got to pick and choose from each, like a la carte, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But people are so stuck on being tribal and loyal to whatever. I mean, let me make another metaphor here. You take a football team, whether it's the Los Angeles Rams or the Washington Redskins or the Washington Redskins, right? Each team has their hardcore fans, and no matter what, they're going to support their team, right? So if there are 10 games in the season, and let's say the Redskins lose 9 out of 10 games, guess what? They suck. Okay, end of story. They suck.
Yeah.
But you tell that to a hardcore Redskins fan, he's going to beat your butt.
Yeah.
We're the greatest team in the world, even though we lost 9 out of 10. Okay, they don't. They just don't. They're not going to. They just can't get their mind around the fact that, hey, something is wrong here. We need to improve our game.
Yeah.
So that's what happens with these hardcore Democrats, Republicans, or liberals and conservatives, and they get too hardcore to where they become extremists within their own group. That's why you have that category called the moderates or whatever, or the independents, because you can go too far left and go too far right.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting, my last podcast that I did just like 2 days ago was with Dr. Corey Clark, who she's a social psychologist. So she has her PhD, very like smart and stuff, like well-read, and talks about the tribalism and all that kind of stuff. But you can learn this by living life too. And it's so interesting how you can, there are a lot of ways that you can understand these concepts. You can understand if you just look at sports, or you can understand it from a book or whatever it is. So here's a question that I'm really curious about, because one of the things that I am kind of fighting against, I am on board with everything you're saying, Daryl, like ignorance, highlighting your blind spots, having challenging conversations, sitting down, looking someone in the eye, treating them like a human being, all of that. I am concerned about the modern day anti-racist movement as it stands. And that sounds like, how can I be against anti-racism? That sounds like a ridiculous concept. So even just saying that, you take that out of context, now you're saying like, oh, I'm defending the KKK. No, I'm not. I'm defending racism. No, I'm not. I am opposing the methods used, like things along the lines of, the hardest people to get on my podcast are the extreme progressive kind of woke people. They will not engage with back and forth. If I say something that comes off as even if I would ask something that's not racist, they could claim it as racist. If I would say something along the lines of nice hair or something, like those microaggressions and things like that, it gets shut down. I feel like the bar for what racism is real. I mean, you said like Charlottesville happened. What's happening right now? Tiki torches. This is real. I worry that if someone says, hey, I like your clothes, and that's racist, or hey, you're rude, don't be rude to the waiter, but it happened to be a black person that was being rude, that's racist, then what do we call the KKK? What do we call the people that have the robes that you've collected? And I worry that we're not having a discussion about what is actual racism anymore, and people are getting so scared, and then the white people are going to get radicalized into actual racism. And I don't know if there's evidence to prove that that's happening, but that is a concern of mine. What are your thoughts on that? The unwillingness to hear alternate points of view from people who are arguing the side of being anti-racist, because the title sounds amazing. I'm an anti-racist. That's how could you ever be against that? And yet I find myself being like, hey, I think I might be against that, which is sounds crazy.
Okay. So, when somebody says, I'm not a racist, that doesn't hold water. That is empty, complete empty. Okay. Because what are you doing? There is racism out here. So I'm not a racist doesn't tell me anything. When you say I'm anti-racist, it means you're taking a stand on something. You may not be a racist, but you're anti, so you're standing against something. Now, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, anti-racist was different than what it is today. Okay, anti-racism was something that was respected. So because anti-racism has been infiltrated with a lot of people who are indeed perhaps anti-racist, it's also been infiltrated with a lot of anarchists and people who are sick and tired of it, and they're just going to come and kick butt. They're going to beat up racists, punch a Nazi, all that kind of stuff.
But they define what a Nazi is. They define what a racist is. You don't go along with my agenda, you're a racist.
Huh?
It's like you don't go along with my agenda or my definitions, then you are a racist.
That too. And even some people who are not violent even have that definition. But these people like you have some people who are in Antifa who are very violent, and they come to these protests and all they want to do is punch a Nazi. Yeah. You have never been able to beat the racism out of somebody. That does not work. All you do is just enforce it when you do that. Yeah. All right. So it's like, if somebody's gay, you're going to beat them into being a heterosexual. It's not going to work. Right. So, but they don't get that. They're in it for the adrenaline to get out there and fight, etc. They don't like racists. They're going to protect black people, protect gay people, protect, whoever, Jewish people. And they're just going to come there and fight this anti-Semitism, fight this racism, because they're anti-racist. That has become the new face of anti-racism.
Fight against it.
Okay?
Fight against
it. So instead of saying, so now it's not cool to be against something. Against means you're countering it. You're pushing back. You're whatever. Rather than be against racism or anti-racism, why don't we say, you and I, we say we're pro-equality.
But part of that narrative is that it's equity, not equality. It's we want if African Americans are 13% of the American population, then we should have 13% of the doctors be, or how many. Like I am all for having diverse boards of companies, but I have worries about the process of how to get there. And I think it's not something you can bulldoze. I think it's a complex thing of why don't we have, like fair representation of, let's just say, blacks in, these certain positions, as opposed to you need to hire 5 people. One of them needs to be black.
At one time, the best person I don't believe so much in affirmative action as I believe in affirmative education.
Yes.
Give everybody the opportunity to learn something so that they're qualified, because you never want to lower the bar. Always keep the bar high and make people come up to that standard. Don't go down, lower the bar in order to hire somebody so you look diversified or whatever, whether it's women, blacks, or anybody else, whites even, whatever. Okay, you keep the bar high and make them reach that level. And if somebody has qualified for that level and you're not hiring them and you're hiring somebody below then we got a problem, and I'm going to come after you.
Absolutely.
Okay? So at one time, back in, I guess maybe the early 80s, the mid 80s, the best person who was in the best position was a black female. With affirmative action, because you had to hire more females, had to hire more black people. So these male chauvinist racists, what did they do? They killed 2 birds with 1 stone. And instead of hiring a black and hiring a female, they hired a black female, right? So they killed 2 birds with 1 stone. And then, of course, that pissed off white women, and pissed off black men. So
these shortcuts, there's no shortcuts through this.
There are always these loopholes, man. Yeah. Always these loopholes. People try to jump through. But we have to change these things. And here's the difference. Okay. People keep saying, why are they burning down these buildings and blah blah blah. I'm not justifying burning down the buildings. I'm not advocating it. Yeah. But I do understand it, and there is a reason behind it. All right. Now, not the looting. Okay, that's something totally separate. There's no justification for that whatsoever. All right. These are people who they're not even there to protest the cause. They're just there to get free stuff, white and black. It's they're opportunists. Yeah. All right, and they try to blend in with the cause and march down the street until and one of them throws a brick in the window and they all run and grab stuff. But the burning of the buildings and and that kind of thing, I get it. It's unfortunate. I don't advocate it. I wouldn't do it, but I understand it, and I don't necessarily blame them. It's like this. We have been telling people for over a century about what's been happening to us. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to hear it because it's not happening to them. And the people who need to hear it, the police, the courts, the judges, shut us down. All right? You find more black people being put in prison for the same crimes whites do, but the blacks get the longer sentences or get the death penalty. Mm-hmm. All right? You don't find white guys. I mean, sure, cops shoot white guys too, but you don't find a white guy getting shot 40 times for holding his cell phone or his wallet. You don't find them putting their knees on white guys' necks. You don't find too many videos, or if any, of black cops putting their knees on white guys' necks. That would never fly. All right. So we've been talking about this before I was born. Yeah. And understand, 30 years ago, nobody had video cameras except the TV studios. Had those big things they put on their shoulder, right? Cost thousands of dollars. I wouldn't be able to afford one. Maybe you would, but not me. But today, everybody has a video camera on their cell phone. So it's not that this stuff is happening more and more. It's that you're seeing it more and more. Yeah. All right? Because people didn't have videos before, but we were telling you about it, and you were shutting us down and not listening to us. Yeah. Right? And we were getting frustrated. Nobody was listening. Listen. So if you are driving down the street speeding, or you run a red light, and the police pull you over, what do? They give you a citation. They give you a ticket. If you do something to somebody and they take you to court, they sue you. If you don't pay your credit card on time, you're assessed a late penalty, a penalty fee for late fee, right? Yeah. All these things have monetary value attached to them. And why are they attaching monetary value to it? Because they're trying to curb your behavior. All right, you're hitting you in the wallet. Nobody wants to be separated from their money. So if it cost you $150 because you were doing 45 in a 25 mile an hour zone, chances are you're not going to do that 45 again, at least not going down that street.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
And, if somebody charged you $25 extra because you didn't pay your bill on time, you're going to make sure you pay it on time the next time. If somebody slips down your stairs because you had ice on your steps and they sue you for $25,000, you're going to be shoveling your steps next time it snows. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So separating you from your money, hitting you in your wallet causes you to modify your behavior. All right. So when we've not been heard, we've been telling you about this before video, even during video, Rodney King and everything else, and you don't listen, then we're going to write that speeding ticket on you. We're going to assess you that late penalty. We're going to sue you, and we do it in the form of costing the city millions and millions of dollars by burning down those buildings. It's not about burning the building down with somebody in it, nothing like that. ISIS and Al-Qaeda were doing that when they bomb hospitals and stuff. We don't do that, or schools or nothing like that. They want to cost the city money. They want to hit them in the wallet to say, we need your attention. We need to be heard. That's why they're doing it.
That's so interesting. Teslin Figaro, I had on my my podcast like a couple weeks ago, and she actually just tweeted something similar. Like, insurance companies are going to have to pay these huge payouts. They're going to put pressure because they have the power. They're going to put pressure on police departments. Hey, you keep beating up people like this, it's going to cost us money, and you're not going to get reelected. So you better cut it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now you understand. Money talks.
Yeah.
And listen, fire can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. I can come to your house. I can heat your house with fire in your fireplace, or I can take fire and burn your house down. Now. This guy, Derek Chauvin, the police officer, he had 18 complaints against him. He only had a 19-year career on the police force and 18 complaints. Mm-hmm. Some 18 people spoke up, and not one of them was listened to at the top, right? Perhaps if just one of those complaints had been addressed and that officer had been reprimanded or transferred to some other job, maybe a desk job or something or whatever, or been retrained or whatever they want to call it, perhaps George Floyd would still be alive today. But 18 different people spoke up and not one complaint was listened to. So when listen, can you imagine a doctor, a police officer, when he becomes a police officer, he is given a license to kill.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a 007 license, James Bond, license to kill, right? He has the authority to use deadly force if needed. When you become a doctor, you get a license. When you start driving, you get a license. When you practice law, you get a license.
You screw up, you lose it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you see a doctor working in a hospital and he's been there 19 years and he's already accumulated 12 malpractice suits? The hospital is going to get rid of that dude.
Yes.
You would never have 18 DWIs and still be driving with your license, would you?
Right.
No. Okay.
100%.
If you were, and you'd lose your license after 2 DWIs or something. You probably get it suspended after 1.
Yeah.
All right. If you were an attorney and you did something that went against the American Bar Association with outside of their rules and regulations, they strip you of your law license. They disbar you is what it's called, right? So how is it that this police officer who's given a license to kill accumulates 18 complaints? He's already shot 2 people dead, okay, and he still has his license to kill. It wasn't a matter of if this happens; it's a question of when is it going to happen, and it happened.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a video soon about systemic racism because it's such a complicated thing, and I think I'm finally able to do it in a way. I'm learning from you, Daryl, like where I can get people who are just like in their zone of just like, no, it's not a thing here. I'm working on a way to explain this because Tony Timpa, I don't know if you've heard of him or his video about a year ago. It was a white guy, bigger white guy, was handcuffed. And they said, get down on the ground. He's like, no, you're going to kill me. And they put down, it's actually very similar where they put their weight on him and he ended up dying, at police hands. And it was, white and black and brown cops and then a white guy. And what I'm trying to express to people is that, yes, that happens. Yes, people do put their, white cops or black cops put their knees on white people too, but it's not on the same level because it's just, it happens. You can always find, look, you found KKK guys that came up and gave you a hug.
Right.
But there are going to be those, but when you pull that straw man argument of say, well, what about this white guy? Look at this. This happened too. It happens to everybody. You're not seeing the big picture. Okay. You're not trying to actually understand what's going on. So I just want to say that because I'd probably have listeners who are like, oh, how does he say that this doesn't happen to white people? You're not saying it doesn't happen ever. You're saying this is not a common thing.
It doesn't happen with the frequency.
Yes, the frequent, it's just not the same thing in that way. So, 3 things I just want to go over, which is real quick. Ask like your kind of quick fire response to these. Another thing that I've been frustrated about is I feel like I actually am an anti-racist, like in the sense of the word that I want to defeat racism. Not even because I'm that nice of a person. I just think it's dumb. I think it's inefficient. I think there's too many brilliant minds out there that if we don't have equity or equality of opportunity and education and stuff, then we're missing out. I've taught in the hood, and I've seen too many brilliant kids that if they were just given a computer, they'd be, an executive at Google. But I feel like racism has kind of like been on the ropes. And now I guess I don't like the narrative that racism has not gotten better. It has gotten better, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Or is it just being driven underground?
Okay, very simply.
Yeah.
White people will say we've come a long way.
I am white and I just said that, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Black people will say we still have a long way to go.
Agreed.
So it's like, it's a glass half full or half empty.
Yeah.
It depends upon, one's perspective, is one's reality. Yes, we have come a long way. I'm no longer having to sit in the back of the bus or drink from a colored water fountain, but I'm still dealing with, police say, they put their lives on the line every day when they go out because, they don't know if they're going to pull over somebody and the guy has a gun in the car and shoots them or whatever. Yeah. This is true.
Yeah.
But if you look at what's happening, I put my life on the line every day. When I walk out my door, am I going to be George Floyd on the ground?
Yes.
Am I going to be Rodney King?
Exclusive at all? Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, it's not mutually exclusive. Yes, I said that we've come a long way, but just for brevity, but I'm very conscious, and this will make me even more so, of saying, and we have a long ways to go. And let's look at what those are. But yeah, they're not mutually exclusive, but it seems like we're siloed and saying we're focusing on this. Yeah. So, conservatives are saying, hey, look how far we've come. And then progressives are saying, look at all the tragedy. And those two can hold the same ground. And we can have some gratitude for how far we've come and say, all right, that means that we have all this room to go and we can do it. I feel like that's kind of like inspiring.
It's like, let's look at churches.
Yeah.
All right. You got these Baptist churches. Why is there a Black Baptist church? Because the white Baptist church didn't particularly like them coming to their church, even though they're Christians, and the Black people are Christians, and the white people, they're Christians, but that's not Christian-like behavior. They read the same Bible, they pray to the same God, still Jesus Christ, right? So then over time, you have a Black Baptist church, white Baptist church, right? So then they'll say, so you say to the guy, okay, well, he believes in Jesus Christ too. He's Black, believes in Jesus Christ, and so do you. So, will you accept me as your brother in Christ? Absolutely. Now we can come sit in your church. I accept you as my brother in Christ. So now then I ask you, yes, you'll accept me as your brother in Christ, but will you accept me as your brother-in-law? If your sister wants to marry me, are you going to accept me as your brother-in-law? Yeah. It would be kind of hard on the kids, if you all had kids. No, it's not going to be hard on the kids. It's only going to be hard on the kids if you are the one dealing with the kids. The kids are going to be fine until you get in there and abuse them and start telling them that they're no good because they're not pure or whatever. The kids are going to be fine.
Yeah, like I don't know. Maybe it's just some in Los Angeles, which is really progressive. But like, because I know that it's different. My wife has a friend in Arkansas who's black, and she has just blatant racist experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like you because you are. But that's just not very common in like that outwardly. I have a good friend, Eric Smith, who's from Gary, Indiana, and then moved down to Sherman Oaks. He just talks about the different kinds of racism, where one's very open, and then one's kind of like surreptitiously, I'll take care of you, very like parental, like, I have empathy for you, so you just sit down and I'll take care of you type of thing. And it's so tricky. You said something about how people said things that were offensive and you didn't get offended. And that's a concept that I'm seeing a lot with, especially with younger generations, is this idea of being so easily offended. And we all look, I could get offended about a lot of things. You say that I'm a bad parent because it's so in line with who I am. I try really hard to be a good dad. So if you say you're a bad parent, I get offended, I act irrationally, I get angry. And so everyone has their things. That's maybe like the psychological backfire effect. Like when you feel like you are being challenged as a person, you get offended, you kind of ignore what they're saying. But how do you do that? How do you hear someone say something so terrible and not get offended?
Because I know exactly who I am. And I can't self-awareness, self-esteem. And you have to consider the person doing the offending. Something is wrong in their lives.
Yeah.
Something is going wrong in their lives. Let me just digress for a quick second. I'm going to have to run here shortly. Yeah. But music. When I was in high school and I decided I was going to become a musician, and I told people, what are you going to do? Blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to go to college, major in music, and play piano for Chuck Berry.
Yeah. They
burst out laughing. They laughed. They didn't believe me. And I was hurt. I was hurt. And I was bitter about that because you asked me a question and I answered it for you. And now you're going to laugh in my face. Those were my intentions. Now, I stayed bitter and angry for a long time. And then it dawned on me one day, I shouldn't be bitter at those people. They were not, what I thought was they were imposing restrictions upon me. I thought, Daryl, you're just dreaming. Yeah, forget it. Chuck Berry's a superstar. We're here in Potomac, Maryland. Chuck Berry doesn't live here. You don't know Chuck Berry any better than I know Chuck Berry. I could never play for Chuck Berry. What makes you think you can play for Chuck Berry? He's like Elvis somewhere. So, they were my thinking was they were imposing limitations upon me, and I was angry. I was bitter because who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do?
Right.
Well, later, after I got over my bitterness, it dawned on me, which made me drop my bitterness like that. I changed overnight once I figured it out. They were not imposing limitations on me. They were imposing limitations on themselves and transferring that to me. Okay? Because they're figuring, I can't play with Chuck Berry, and Daryl sits right here at the next desk over. What's he got that I don't have? We read the same books. We have the same teachers, live in the same neighborhood. What gives him any advantage? If I can't do it, he can't do it. So it's like you. If the cops don't beat me up, why would they beat up, my friend Eric, somebody who's black?
Yeah.
Okay. So, they're imposing the limitations on themselves and transferring it on to me. So then I started laughing and I dropped that bitterness. And then years later, because I played for Chuck Berry after I graduated high school, I went to college, got my degree in music. And a year after I graduated college, I worked for Chuck Berry for 32 years. All right. So years later, when I start writing, I'm going to write this book on the Klan. I'm going to go around the country, interview these Klan people. People at my gigs will say, hey, so, what you been up to? I say, hey, I'm going to write a book on the Klan. I'm going to go to some Klan rallies, meet some Klan people, interview them. They're like, that's not going to happen. You're dreaming, man. You get yourself killed, So there it was again, telling me what I can and cannot do. But I didn't go back into that old Daryl Davis. I knew. They're telling me I can't do it because they wouldn't go to a Klan rally. They don't know me. So I went ahead and did it. And had I listened to those people, I never would have played with Chuck Berry. Had I listened to those people, I never would have written the book that I wrote or done the work that I've done.
Don't listen to limitations.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for being here. I know you got to go. We did a long time. Thank you for sharing your story.
My pleasure. Let's do part 2 sometime.
Oh, I would love to. Yeah, that would be great. Let's do that. Anywhere where people can see what you're up to, hear your music, anything like that?
Well, we're still on lockdown here, but yeah, my website is Daryl, Daryl, only one R, DarylDavis.com. And I'll update the website and get some more dates on there. I think some stuff is coming up in late July and August.
Okay.
If it doesn't get canceled.
Hopefully. Well, just your life is one that we can learn a lot from, and I really appreciate it. And I would love to do a part 2. We'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you, man. You take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.